Hi everyone, welcome to HRC Online's dynamic content events. This is called Let's Talk HR, and today we're talking about investing in well-being. I'm joined today by three guests. Victoria, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you, James. How are you?
Not bad, not bad. Busy day, but getting there. And Gail, over from Canada, who's a few connection problems, so if you go a bit jumpy, that's why. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
And then we've got Joanna. Have you been at home today, or have you been down in Wales?
I've been at home, which has been good, and it's turning into a nice evening with some interesting discussions, we hope.
Hopefully. Well, today we're talking about investing in well-being and organisations in well-being within the CIPD module. I think it's 50S07 because they love to give them codes. Well-being at work. One of the assessment criteria is assess the value of adopting well-being practices within organisations. So CIPD really want people to understand sort of well-being, and they try to define it in 7 different terms. 1 is health, 2 is good work, 3 is values and principles, 4 is collective social well-being, 5 is personal growth, 6 is good lifestyles and choices, and 7 is financial well-being. But in a recent article, they're saying that well-being is dropping down in the list of preferences for organizations because I think probably financial constraints and pressures. Joanna, which of these sort of principles or what sort of well-being ideas do you think organizations are sort of not on top of at the moment, really?
Do you know, I'm kind of surprised that you're saying it's dropping down as a lower priority, because one of the challenges that currently most people are experiencing is just how difficult it is to recruit. And actually people are quite choosy at the moment because the market is such that people can choose jobs. And because so many people have spent so long working from home, actually, if a company doesn't pay attention to how it's looking after people, they're simply not going to want to go there, or they're going to want to leave. So I kind of think that's a big mistake. Actually, well-being higher up in the
Your
agenda.
dog, not mine.
You're like, that's agreement. That was agreement. It's really important.
Well, the Health and Wellbeing at Work survey, I mean, it was published on 5th of April, so we're talking a couple of days ago. HR professionals, senior leaders, interest in wellbeing's fallen from 75 to 70% in opinion. Actions and behaviours has fallen from 48% to 42% in people thinking about it. I mean, in the UK, Gail, we're referring to it as the Great Resignation, and sort of it's a candidate-led market in that side of things. Is that similar sort of feeling in Canada, or because you're so widespread, maybe home working's been a little bit more embedded in your culture before COVID hit?
It's interesting that you say that. I find that this great resignation is part of a global issue, and we're definitely seeing that here in Canada as well. People who aren't particularly, maybe they're not unhappy in their job, but they're looking for change, having that flexibility and just different responsibilities and outcomes for their position. They're jumping ship to go find greener grass somewhere else. And a lot of the times I find that it's just that they're looking to expand on their responsibilities and grow as professionals. Maybe a lot of it has to do with the pandemic. Well, a lot of it has to do with the pandemic and we had 2 years of working from home or having some kind of flexibility in our schedules. So people that are going back to the office now and are back into a rigid routine might be looking for something that has more flexibility. Definitely, we're seeing that here in Canada.
Okay. And I mean, Vic, you, as of what, you're 7 days in now to your new business, working for yourself. No longer pressured by the 9 to 5. I was going to say, how are you finding it? Which obviously 7 days in, probably not knowing too much, but what decisions, I guess, what were the elements that made you think for your well-being, being your own boss would be the better solution?
You know, that's an interesting question, because yes, I did make that move for the well-being side of things and to spend a bit more time because I've got a young child. However, I think it's difficult when you're doing things from home, it's difficult to switch off and it's difficult to stop working. So especially when, as you say, I'm kind of 7 days in, I took that leap from the being employed to the being self-employed side of things. And that's it. You want to please everybody to begin with. You want to keep saying yes. You want to take on that work. You want to keep going and keep going. So actually 7 days in, my well-being isn't as great as it probably could be. But that will take time, I think. But one of the bits that I wanted to pick up on is something that I was talking about with a company last week, in terms of investing in well-being. And when Gail was talking about positions in companies, what I'm kind of seeing is a lack of investment into managers and how they manage well-being conversations with their staff. And that's one of the areas I think that potentially is causing some problems, because of the pandemic, because of people working from home, because we've got screens, and that's how we're managing our staff, when we were potentially managing our staff behind screens. You're having to manage well-being conversations and recognizing well-being in others online, virtually, which is really, really tough. And it's something that I don't believe is invested in enough in companies, where they're showing managers how to have those conversations and how to recognize things in other individuals. But also, kind of linked to what you were saying about my well-being, is the absorption of other people's issues when you're managing them in terms of well-being, and how to stop that crossover between being a manager and then becoming a counselor or a friend. And I think that's really, really hard, and much harder online than it is if you're actually in an office and you can say, you know, you can go to the well-being expert, or you can go to safeguarding, you can go down the corridor. I think there are some boundaries that get crossed.
I think that's a really strong point. I think we need to learn to do well-being differently, and we haven't quite figured out what that is yet. So some organizations have gone back to what they were doing before, because they need to, you know, that it's a different environment. Some are sticking with what they've done in the pandemic, and some, like my own organization, is attempting hybrid working. But actually nobody really knows quite where we want the balance to lie, you know, how much flexibility we want. It's lovely going back in and seeing people and having that interaction, but you also almost need to give yourself permission to just have a chat, because we've got so used to being productive and being on it all the time. And I think it's almost the same for well-being, that we need to learn how to do things virtually. We need to learn when it's really, really important to be face to face, but also give ourselves permission to do it all very differently to how we were used to.
And I think when the pandemic 1.0, way back, Gail, people used to feel that guilt, didn't they? That they needed to respond to an email immediately. They needed to show that they were online, and they needed to show that, look, I'm available, I'm at home, I am working. Do you think people have got over that guilt, or do you think it's just embedded potentially a negative well-being culture in people? Or probably a mix of both is the answer.
Well, I definitely think that issue has more to do with the technology than the pandemic. clearly everybody has a smartphone or some kind of device that they get their emails and work phone calls and everything else going to. So I know myself, I check my work email at 5 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes I'm checking it at 9 o'clock at night. And it's really up to myself to draw those boundaries. For my staff, I don't send them emails outside of business hours because I don't want them to be responding outside of business hours. I know for our nature of work, we're in, I manage a not-for-profit organization. So a lot of the times we are working outside of our regular business hours, but I think that's more so because we choose to have those communications outside of the regular business hours and connect as individuals rather than as professionals in the workplace. We're connecting as individuals to have that human connection and human interaction outside of work, even though we're talking about work a lot of the times.
And I've read quite a lot of people putting delays on their email. You know, if they're working at night, putting a delay on their email so that it gets sent at 9 o'clock as opposed to getting sent immediately. But I think what we've talked about so far is quite a high risk of mental health of people, you know, taking on all the pressure and things like that. I think the other thing we've got to recognize is physical health. I think I've looked on my phone, certain days I've made 12 steps. And I haven't left my thing. You know, how do organizations support physical health and well-being, Joanna, in this hybrid world? Because it's not good to just sit at your desk for an entire day and not move.
I completely recognize what you're saying there. I just do not walk as much as I did. And the idea that we had at the very start of all of this of going for an hour's walk every day, actually, I don't even think that's possible on a lot of days. So I do think that organizations have got a little bit of responsibility here. I'm quite lucky where I am that we've got a volunteer who really loves physical education, I suppose, and he actually runs free classes at 8:30 in the morning, which, you know, you can volunteer to take part on. But I think there's stuff like that people need to have access to. And, you know, there's a lot of, I suppose there's actually an opening in the market for somebody to really sell short bite-sized wellbeing sessions that are pre-recorded or that are live for people to use. Because I think, you know, it's part of learning to do it differently, facilitating things differently. I did try a walking meeting very, very early on, but the Wi-Fi really didn't lend itself to it, and the mobile network didn't lend itself to it. But that's something I'm tempted to try again, because that would be fantastic. But I just don't think technology was quite there, and I don't live that far away from anywhere.
No, the wind as well for me. I always found the wind on my phone when I'm speaking to someone. It just blows straight up the microphone.
Yeah.
Gail, when lockdown happened in the UK, there was a guy called Joe Wicks on British TV. He was everywhere, so you can tell. And he did exercise classes with kids and with parents, and they got all the exercise going. Now, the UK is not great at physical education promotion. I mean, I feel that we're not. What's it like in Canada? Is there a lot of positive physical well-being embedded within organizations?
I think that, yes, there is, depending certainly on the organization. There's some, and I'm just thinking of locally for businesses that I'm connected to. It really depends on the industry. There's some oil and gas and construction and that kind of thing. And it's, I think, less focused on the physical health of their employees. It's more of a reactive rather than proactive situation. And then when you look at other industries like obviously healthcare, education, not-for-profit, there might be a bit more of proactive part to that. I know for myself, working in not-for-profit, I have a very small team. So one of the things that we actually did and I think it was more for our mental health and social well-being than our physical health, but once every month and this is during the lockdown, so we weren't allowed to meet in person inside. However, we were allowed to meet outside. So we picked a trail, and we would clean that trail. So pick up any litter throughout that trail. And then that hour and a half that it took us to clean the trail every month was our social time, and we got to see each other and that kind of thing. Whereas if we strictly were not meeting because we couldn't meet in an office or indoors, we wouldn't have had that connection.
Do you think that's brilliant? I just thought you were going to say walk the trail, but clean the trail.
Yeah.
It's someone must do it somewhere, but I never know who does, because I walk my dog about 6 a.m. and I never see anyone do it.
I think that what companies say they do and what they actually do is there's a big difference. And it's an experience that I've had in a company not too long ago, is that they pride themselves on wellness and well-being and making sure that that's at the forefront when they are recruiting. This is the great company to work for. But then when you get into the company, their work kind of ethic is, we are fast-paced. We're a fast-paced environment. This is what and our expectation is that people work that way. So they recruit particular individuals because they believe that they work at a quick pace. They believe that they're going to be able to keep up with the changes and things like that happen in the organization. So the people that have gone, oh, this is a great place to work because they focus on well-being, they focus on wellness, they go into the company, then they're going, okay, so bang, 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 we've got this meeting here, we need this, we need this, we need this. And they're like, oh, whoa, hang on, I thought that this was focusing on wellness. And that could be potentially a reason why people start looking to leave, because the expectation that's set at the front isn't actually the reality when they get into the company. Because and online especially, it's even worse when you've got people booking things into your diary. They'll just look at a gap. They won't ask you, you're not there. So they'll put it in your diary. You've got a nice gap from 12 till 1. So I'm going to put a meeting in there. It doesn't matter whether you were going out for a walk with your dog or you've got lunch or you wanted to do some Joe Wicks on the television. You can't, because they've just booked a meeting in. So I think there's a big difference between what people are going to say they're going to do and what they actually do.
You know, I wonder, and it's kind of been processing and through the conversation here with the 2 years of the pandemic and working remotely, working from home. I wonder if the Great Resignation is more connected to that loss of connection to the organization's culture and goals than it is to the well-being. You know, for me, in not-for-profit, and I mean, all companies have their mission and vision and their goals and values that you walk and talk every day when you're in the office. But when you're working from home consistently for 2 years, you might lose that connection. And that is possibly why there's such a great resignation happening.
Definitely true when you factor in furlough as well, Joanna, isn't it? You know, we had such a big furlough thing here in the UK that if that company said, we can move you out, we don't need you, and we'll pay you 80% of your salary and you'll stay there for a year, but other people in the teams are doing work and obviously they feel like they could do it, you're going to lose connection to that organization, aren't you?
I think that's really true. Furlough imposed particular pressures on those who were furloughed and those who weren't, and it was quite divisive if it wasn't everybody. And you know, I was in an organization where it was half and half, and that was really tough going for everybody concerned. I think I was going to say something else, which has just slipped out of my head as well. I agree, re the furlough, and I agree that you know, it is very related to the pandemic and the changes, and we're still kind of in recovery. And you know, that awful phrase of the new normal, but what is that? We don't even know what we want. I tell you who's done a really great piece of work. Lloyds Bank have been thinking about their hybrid model, and they've done a podcast that might be worth a look up. But interestingly, they thought they were going back into the office for collaboration, which is actually where my organisation was. We're going to do it for a purpose. We're going to do it for collaboration. And what Lloyds have said, which I think is true, and I think they're just ahead of us, is that they are going back together for community, which picks up on the point of you've got to have that connection. You've got to have that social interaction. And it isn't about productivity or anything else. It's about feeling you're part of something, and feeling that what you're doing is worthwhile and is appreciated and you're valued. And it comes back to all sorts of things that are fairly intangible, but we do expect from the workplace in some form or other.
I think a lot of times it could, you know, yeah, all right, my wife's all right, you know, we get on all right, but for 2 years, she's the only person really that I spoke to face to face. And you know, at times she can be quite annoying. And just to be able to meet other people is kind of important, isn't it, Vic?
Do you know, it is really important. And I think that when I talk about things like this, I mean, I've been working from home before the pandemic. So that was my role, that as a home worker. So actually the benefits of it for me, because it was flexible around my children, things like that. Actually, I just worked the same way throughout the pandemic. It didn't bother me in that respect in terms of my work practice. As I said before, it's difficult to switch off because you're in the same environment. And as you were saying, James, you know, you've got that one person to speak to. You're in that environment. You just go upstairs to bed, and downstairs is your office, but it's your kitchen as well, or it's your sitting room as well. And it's how to figure out how to split off from that. But I think that controversially, I wanted to say something, and I don't know how well it will go down, but I think that in some ways, it's the pandemic has brought about a certain set of people that don't really want to be in the office, and that potentially don't want to perform as well as what's expected of them. And there is that flip side of things of when you've got a bit of well-being, you obviously have to recognize that you must be inclusive, you must understand what people are going through. But there's also that element of performance management and the expectations still, whether you're working from home or whether you're in the office, as to how flexible you really should be, or how and you know, even if you're managing those people or you're expecting a certain outcome, not to use it as an opportunity not to perform. And that creates all kinds of different issues for being managed and things like that, because where do you then again draw the line over well-being and performance?
So it's interesting, isn't it? Because and I'm gonna say this question, and then I'm just gonna let anyone answer it, because I don't want to pin this on one person. If you think about it, if people would try and get away with work, whether they're working, you know, people who don't want to do the work are going to not try and do the work, whether they're at home or whether they're in the office. Really, it comes down to line managers. And are we talking about line managers who themselves are not being proactive in seeing how people are performing and keeping on top of the work people are doing? And is that what's creating a hesitation for some people? because they don't know how to manage effectively staff who are disengaged or disenfranchised with their organization. I'll just anyone?
I think it's a good point. It comes back to what we were saying earlier about needing to be trained to deal with virtual management, and it is all about productivity, but how are you going to judge that? How are you going to support that? How are you going to even know when somebody has a well-being issue? Because our conversations are somewhat more constrained, and the body language that you'd have picked up for stress or underperformance or anything else is a little bit more limited. So again, I don't know how long it's going to take us, but we're still getting used to it.
And how do you check in with your team virtually to see how everyone's doing? Because someone can just disappear if they're not having a good day and not make the calls or make the messages and stuff like that. How do you keep in touch with people?
Well, we're all pretty much. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
So here in my area of Canada, we are mostly all back to work in the office, except for obviously there's companies that have remained remote or created a hybrid model. Our work from home mandate was lifted March 1st. So during the pandemic, I stayed connected with my team over Zoom and Microsoft Teams meetings. We would hold meetings twice a week. And then obviously we would meet outdoors to do our trail walks and trail clean. And I had the opportunity to also connect with each of my employees individually. I would, and thankfully it's a small team, I would go and buy coffee or lunch for my employees and deliver it right to their house personally. And then I could stand outside and wave at them and not have any contact and not go inside their house. But I think definitely with the whole returning to work aspect, one thing that employers really need to keep in mind is that psychological safety. So some people are ready to go back to the office and they want that human interaction, but others are really scared. They're worried about the pandemic, another wave coming, or they're worried about getting sick, or they have a child or a spouse at home that has immune disorder or something like that makes them more susceptible. So as an individual, you're worried about going to the office because you're not sure what it's going to entail and you're worried about getting sick. So there really is that balance on the people that do want to go to work, and I agree there are some people that want to stay remote because they think that they can underperform. But definitely to maintain that performance, it's not the number of hours that employee puts in, it's the results that you get from their work. So I'm not just looking at the timesheet for my employees, I'm looking at the results that they're creating. And I think that's the best way to gauge someone's performance rather than the hours that they're putting in.
And there's been Gary, you raised a really good point. There's been quite an increase in agoraphobia diagnosis across the NHS, which is, for anyone that doesn't know, it's fear of leaving your house. And I guess when we're talking about well-being and we're talking about providing that well-being service, there's some organisations that will have rules to get people back in the office, Joanna. But there's some people that will need actual medical intervention, psychological intervention to be able to get themselves back in the office. How do you approach a situation like that? If you're caught in the middle in HR of someone saying, I'm too scared, and the organisation saying, well, you have to come in, what should someone be doing?
I think it's another good question, really. I think we've been, to some extent, experiencing that when we've had our sort of face-to-face sessions. And what we've found is that everybody's, much as Gail described, in very different places mentally. Some people are absolutely delighted to be back and seeing each other, and other people have been really, really super anxious about it, and actually have found the experience quite overwhelming, and aren't sure that they want to do it again. And I think at the moment we've been trying to support people to test out an experience going back into the office in a way that they feel comfortable. So I don't know that it's the right way, but allowing people to have short visits to a local office when there's not that many people there and they're not traveling in rush hour and it's with just a small team, that sort of, you know, trying to get people over the first hurdles of going and experiencing it before they're forced into much larger meetings. And I think we are traveling at different paces. And I think the really, really difficult thing for HR to judge is when do you draw the line of, but actually you're not a home worker and you are going to have to do this at some point. And I think there's a fair amount of trepidation about getting to that point and actually saying you have to come in. This is part of your job. It will happen at some point.
It's hard to justify, isn't it, though, when you've seen that you can work from home, and that it's like, well, why am I needed in an office when I can work from home? And you're saying, no, you do have to come in, and then the message as to why and what the benefit is slightly watered down. And it's like, well, why am I needed in here? I've been perfectly fine at home and I can do my work and I've contributed and the place is still running and ticking over for the last 2 years. Why am I needed at work?
I think it comes back to that point about feeling like you're part of something and feeling like part of the community. And the very people you're talking about don't necessarily value that highly, but
yeah,
it is kind of the deal. It's the psychological contract, isn't it? You've joined that organization, you said you're going to work for them, you have to care about being part of that community, or you're probably not in the right community.
Yeah,
it comes down to a point, doesn't it, where they're paying you to deliver a work and they want the work delivered in a certain way. At what point is the compromise over, I guess?
Yeah.
I've got one more. There's one more main question, and then we're going to finish on something which I'm not going to tell you about yet. I'm not going to give you a chance to prep. Financial well-being is kind of one of the big critical ones as well. Gail, I'll update you in what's going on in the UK at the moment. Everything's gone through the roof. Gas and electricity bills have doubled. Petrol has gone from like £1.20 to £1.70. So traveling and commuting is ridiculously expensive. So no matter where you go, your bills have gone through the roof. I think my electric bill is now 50% of my mortgage, which is utterly ridiculous. And minimum wage has gone up a tiny amount. And they're giving, a 5p levy off petrol, which dropped for a day and then went back up over 7p. How do organizations, and organizations have got these big buildings that they're paying for and no staff to them. What should the priority for organizations be for sort of financial well-being of staff? Should it be, let's reduce some of the premises size and get everyone a fair wage? Should it be, let's get people in the office, reduce their costs? How would you approach the financial side of things? And Vic, I'll start with you, because obviously you've got the UK stuff, and I'll give Gail time to think about what's going on in Canada.
I am of the opinion that if work can be done from home, that to do that, I've seen organisations close down their offices because of it, because actually it's not beneficial to have them there, but having the gatherings still in hired out premises so that people can go in and have that social interaction that, you know, as and when, but they're not paying for the massive building and the heating and all of this kind of stuff, but also giving a kind of a work from home incentive in terms of a little bit of extra money for your heating or your, you know, broadband and things like that, which is actually really nice. And that's it, that does make you feel, you know, a little bit more valued. But, and also again, when you're talking about if you travel for your role, for example, or if, you know, for coaches that do visits to people on your apprenticeships or what have you, if you could do more of those virtually, do a little bit less of the face-to-face, or do it as a group. So pulling, just doing a little bit more thought process as to whether you're wasting people's time, resources, money, space, or whether you could do it in a slightly more efficient way, not necessarily just staying at home or just going into the office. But if you can streamline your processes a little bit more, and there's me going into my lean mindset, as I always do, but if you can gather a group of people and deliver something all together, great, because you've saved some cost of travel, you've saved some bits and pieces. So I think it's not a kind of one size fits all approach when you go, should we do this or should we do that? If you just had a little bit more foresight into being more efficient, I think that would certainly help.
And Joanna, UK employment law says that employers have to give staff the tools to be able to do their job, which, you know, and all the equipment to be able to do their job. So to be able to do your job, if you're working from home, you need the internet, you need electricity, but most people don't make a contribution to bills because you've got electricity and you've got internet at home. Where's the line? What's the ruling on this? How should organizations approach this? If someone says you should pay for my, you know, I work 8 hours a day, I have electricity for 24 hours a day, turn it all off at night, you should be paying my electricity bill.
I think it kind of depends on employment status. So if you are classed as a home worker, the organisation has a responsibility that is greater, and they need to make sure that you are able to work at home. We're a lot of us in a different situation, in that, you know, there are many organisations that still have base offices that haven't yet closed them down or downsized them, possibly can't do that just yet for a variety of reasons, and therefore contracts haven't changed. So I mean, technically I'm still based in an office that I visited 3 times in the last year, because I joined the organisation in lockdown and there just hasn't been any real reasons to go into my local office. I've actually travelled to other offices to see people. So I think where you have an office, part of the answer has always been, well, you have a choice about going in there. And there's not a lot of middle ground between those two extremes. But I think, coming back to your original question of how do we support people then? Well, if we're not classing them as home workers and doing everything, you know, suggested as a great home working offering there, then we need to at least be having good conversations with people and opening the door for them to talk about their worries and concerns about finances, and provide some advice and guidance. You know, you can get HR advice and guidance. You can also get financial advice and guidance. And, you know, companies ought to be thinking about supporting their workers by paying for that at the moment and allowing people to at least have a conversation. I also think, just to throw in, that it depends what your worker makeup's like, because some organisations are going to have a much greater proportion of people who are on or close to minimum wage, for whom all of this is infinitely more difficult than those at in the middle and higher bands. So, maybe the answer is a little bit different. Maybe everybody's circumstances is a little bit different, but we have at least got to talk about it.
And Gail, how is it in Canada? I'm assuming prices are rising everywhere, but I don't know if is everything going up way faster than the minimum wage rise, or are Canada staying on top of this? Wouldn't surprise me if it's the UK behind.
It's absolutely the same scenario. We're having a significantly increase in cost of living and inflation, and our wages and salaries are certainly not matching those increases. I did meet with part of my HR community just a couple days ago, and it was really interesting hearing some of the different ideas that their organizations have implemented to combat these exponentially increasing costs for running a business. And one of the organizations is very progressive and has moved to a virtual or hybrid model of work. And what they've implemented is they call it a workspace hotel. So you don't have to be at the office for your full day or your full week, but you can book times in the hotel to go in and do your work in a workspace, but you're only there for that short period of time, and the rest of your work you're doing from home. And then other organizations that have switched some employees to fully remote, they're offering an incentive I'm not sure how much exactly, but a financial incentive to help them set up a home office, getting a new desk or an ergonomically proper chair or that kind of thing. And then also offering a certain amount each month to support their internet or utilities and that kind of thing while they're working fully remote as well. So I really enjoyed hearing from my HR community on those topics, because of great ideas, whereas some other organizations are, nope, the pandemic's over, everybody needs to come back to the office, and that's really not respecting individual values or safety levels as well. So it was great to hear that the hotel, the hybrid, and the remote models that some other professionals are using.
And sort of just round off, because obviously we're talking about adopting wellbeing practices in organizations. Things are starting, the new normal. I'm not going to say, I know you said it earlier, Joanna, but 2022, I'm going to ask each of you, what new well-being practice would you like to see the majority of organizations implement? What would, if you were running one of these big FTSE 100 organizations and they were like, right, we need a new well-being initiative that's going to improve staff's mental, physical, well-being. And I know you're probably going to need to say a range of things, but if you had to pick one, what would you be implementing in 2022? And Joanna, I'm going to start with you because obviously.
I am going to nick the idea from the organisation I'm in, because it was something I was delighted to have. They've got a corporate membership to one of the mental wellbeing apps, and I think that's fantastic, because I've now got that on my phone. It's something I'd looked at but hadn't chosen to pay for myself, and actually having that, probably not at a huge cost to the organisation, but having access to it, I think is really quite good, because that feels like a step change difference to an EAP, an employee assistance program, which feels very formal. So having an informal access to wellbeing support, particularly focused on mental health and mindfulness, I think that's a great idea.
And I'm assuming it sends like notifications and things to just remind you of little bits and pieces to do, really, as opposed to just, do you need help? Can we help you? Are you okay? Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Just little things like, have you been for a walk today? Or meditation can do blah, blah, blah.
As well, and choose what you get. But yeah, it's really good.
Gail, what about you? What initiative would you want to see implemented in 2022 to improve wellbeing?
Well, I think it would be different for everyone, but I think if I was looking at the big picture of everything that we've been through in the last 2 years, is every organization should have a mental health day for their employees. So if you're just not feeling it on a certain day, or you're feeling stressed out or run down, take a mental health day and no questions asked, and it's a paid day. Everyone needs that break, whether they just turn off their devices and watch Netflix for the day, or they take that mental health day and volunteer for an organization they're passionate about, or they take that day to spend with their children and family. I think that would really be supporting the mental health and well-being of the employees that work for you, and it's a great way to show them that you care and that you support their mental health and their wellness throughout their employment.
That's a really good idea. It's not exactly expensive. So many companies go, "We'll give you your birthday off," and no one ever takes it. Whereas I think saying you can just say, "I need a day," and not even have to explain why, I think, it seems like a really sensible one. Vic, what about you?
Mine, with my true L&D hat on, would be the investment in training people to be
CIPD level 5 qualifications, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. To train people with to be mental health champions within organizations, and to also invest, like we were talking at the very beginning, invest in the management to have those conversations and be able to have those conversations before they're directing and signposting people for support, is to actually know and understand triggers in people, both virtually and in the office, and take the money, take the time to pull those people out and to give them the support and guidance that they need to manage these people effectively.
I think that's a really good idea. I mean, I think what we've talked about earlier is that, I don't want to say they're failing, because some line managers will be doing incredibly well at it, and others obviously need some support because it's new, but that identification of problems and wellness, mixed with that ability to just take a day, and then, as Joanna, you mentioned the app and stuff like that, someone you can go to that's available and it's unintrusive. You're not feeling like having to take a step or a jump. Is on your phone and things like that. Through really good ideas to sort of improve wellness. So thank you very much to Vic, Joanna, and Gail for joining us. This has been Let's Talk HR. This is HRC Online. Thank you very much, and we will catch you on the next one. Take care.
See you then.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.